This Monday night in Madison Square Garden in a special midget tag team match. Cowboy Lang to my right, to his right, Coconut Willie. I suppose you fellows are looking forward to appearing in the Garden this Monday.
That's right, Vince. I'm looking forward to come back at the Gardens. And then my second time back to the Garden, and my partner, his first time in New York. And we got tough opponents right now, Low Tokyo and Billy the Kid. And right now, Low Tokyo holds the world belt of the midgets, and he's one of the best of them all.
Well, I'll tell you, from what we've seen, you two fellas are unquestionably two of the best in the world as well. So I think we're going to have one whale of a tag team match here set for Madison Square Garden.
Attention! Weighing at 103 pounds, ladies and gentlemen, Cowboy Lang! One ball!
Professional wrestling is a sport built on larger-than-life characters, but some of its most enduring stars stood much shorter than the rest. In a world built for giants, Cowboy Lang stood only 4 feet tall, but in the wrestling ring, he was a towering presence. For over 30 years, the Canadian-born midget wrestler thrilled crowds from coast to coast with his cowboy hat, quick wit, and fearless style. Long before televised wrestling became dominated by heavyweights and spectacle, Lang was a staple attraction, proving that charisma and skill could outshine size. Yet, like many of wrestling's forgotten heroes, his story is one of both triumph and tragedy, a rise to the top of a unique wrestling circuit, followed by a quiet fall from the spotlight. This is the story of Cowboy Lang, the little man who cast a giant shadow in the squared circle. Born Harry Lang on August 28, 1950, in Saskatchewan, Canada, Lang discovered wrestling in an era when midget wrestling was a popular attraction for promoters. The division offered smaller wrestlers the chance to showcase both technical skill and comedic timing, often acting as a crowd-pleasing interlude between heavyweight bouts. Lang's initial training began in Edmonton, but in 1967 he hopped a train bound for Ontario, where at just 16 years old, he began learning the ropes of professional wrestling from another little person, Lord Littlebrook, on his Havelock farm outside Peterborough. From that point on, the road became his home, with wrestling taking him across North America and as far as Asia, Africa, and Europe. From the start, Lang stood out. He blended the Western swagger of a traditional wrestling cowboy with high-energy ring work, earning bookings with some of the biggest wrestling territories in North America. Lang's career took him to nearly every major promotion of his time: Stampede Wrestling, Jim Crockett Promotions, the AWA, the NWA, and even the WWF. His most prestigious accolade came in the form of the NWA World Midgets Championship, a title he won twice. One of his career highlights came at AWA Wrestle Rock in 1986, where he teamed with Little Mr. T to defeat Little Tokyo and Lord Littlebrook in a high-profile match that drew national attention. Even though Wrestle Rock was fighting against the rise of the World Wrestling Federation and had one of the worst commercials in wrestling history, where the participants actually rapped, the show itself was considered a supercard of the era, with legends like the Road Warriors, the Freebirds, Scott Hall, and Curt Hennig in some of the bigger matches of the night. But if Lang had a defining in-ring story, it was his long-running rivalry with Little Tokyo. The two met countless times in arenas across the United States and Canada, exchanging the Midget Championship in a series of hard-fought contests that blended athleticism with showmanship. Lang's style was less about slapstick comedy and more about grit. He wrestled like a competitor, not a novelty. In the 1960s through the 1980s, midget wrestling was a staple of the wrestling circuit. Fans knew the names: Sky-Low Low, Little Beaver, Lord Littlebrook, and, of course, Cowboy Lang. These performers were not just sideshow acts. They were skilled athletes who could work a crowd as well as any main event star. Lang's cowboy persona gave him a distinct identity that promoters could easily market, and his talent ensured repeat bookings. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the wrestling industry began to shift. The territory system dissolved, national television consolidated wrestling into fewer promotions, and the popularity of midget wrestling waned. Opportunities became scarcer, and for many like Lang, the glory days were behind them. Outside the ring, Lang's life was colorful but tumultuous. He was known in the locker room for his confidence and sense of humor. Ric Flair even recalled in his autobiography that Lang would strut around backstage in his cowboy hat and nothing else, jokingly insisting that Flair help him meet women. Yet the end of his career brought hardships. In his final years, Lang drifted into isolation, distancing himself from friends and the wrestling community that had once been his life. A bitter divorce left him with little to his name, and the losses seemed to drain his will to keep fighting for a better future. Stripped of stability and support, he spent his last years living on the streets, far from the bright lights and roaring crowds that had once defined him. On January 4th, 2007, Cowboy Lang passed away at just 56 years old, closing the book on a remarkable but underappreciated career. Cowboy Lang's name may not be widely known to modern wrestling fans, but among historians and those who saw him perform, his impact is clear. He was one of the most talented and consistent midget wrestlers of his generation, a two-time world champion who traveled the continent and entertained countless fans. His matches stood as proof that wrestling greatness isn't measured in feet and inches, but in presence, performance, and connection with the crowd. Today, as wrestling historians look back at the forgotten corners of the sport's history, Lang's career offers both inspiration and caution, a reminder of the opportunities the wrestling boom once provided, and the struggles that often followed when the spotlight dimmed.